We'll sip for coffee first. Cheers. Hello and welcome to Rasa Office Hours with me and Daksh. Would you like to start off by introducing yourself? Also, apologies, your title in the title card was actually wrong. You're a senior machine learning researcher, extra fancy. So, what do you do as a senior machine learning researcher here at Rasa? And uh, let's start off with, once you've introduced yourself, what question would you like people to ask you? And then I can ask you, and we can start with that.
Hi everyone, and thanks Rachel for having me. I can't believe this is the first time I'm doing this, so
I know.
definitely a great experience for me to interact with the community. Yeah, so I'm Daksh. I'm a senior machine learning researcher with the research team at Rasa, and yeah, so I've been over here for the last 2.5 years, and since then, basically, I think a lot of research features I've been happy to contribute to. So, starting with support for big language models,
Mm,
that became a feature, and then naturally that getting into all the work that we did behind diet
mm,
and making that part of the production code. And then most recently started working a lot into dialogue management as well, so and specifically around how do you surface conversations which could be problematic, which gave rise to a new feature which is like a policy which we call as
mhm.
the unexpected intent policy. And yeah, I'm very excited about that as a feature. And Most recently, again, I've been looking into the dialogue management side. How do
Mhm.
we enable more natural and flexible conversations? I know a lot of in production assistants that right now get built needs the reliability of from a dialogue management
Mhm.
system, because you're putting things in production. So how do you basically have that reliability, but still not have a very basic assistant which relies on buttons and like an IVR system? So, how do you enable those natural conversations with the added reliability that you actually want? So, a lot of problem discovery around that has been my focus in the last few months.
Ha. Yeah, I think folks who are on the channel have definitely, well, if you've been on the channel for a while, maybe you haven't heard of all those things, but certainly diet and unexpected we've talked about quite a lot. Yeah, and I think I think something that you also, hi Amina, something that you touched on there is, I mean, one of the reasons that Raza was founded, right, was to help uh, handle, like, most conversations follow a fairly simple pattern, but some of them don't, and it's very frustrating if you're in that percentage of people who doesn't. So how do we help, you know, capture those edge cases, have more flexible behavior, and help everybody? Yeah.
Definitely.
So we haven't gotten a question just yet, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat, so feel free to chime in if anybody has any. Um, but what question would you love to be asked? And then I'll ask it.
I mean, I think um, I would love to hear questions on basically how to go about building an assistant, really.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of my recent work has been looking into different kinds of assistants and trying to abstract out patterns which can be reusable and modular across different kinds of assistants. So basically, assistant building as a problem
Mm-hmm.
itself is interesting, I would say, in different contexts. So if you have a problem of where you're building an assistant for a particular specific use case and you feel like you're hitting the wall constantly about how do you enable a particular use case, I think that would be great. I'm more than happy to hear about your use case and try to answer that.
Yeah, I don't think I can ask that right now, but I know that Mina in particular has been working on an assistant for a while now, and I believe it's either not in English or it's multilingual, and one of the languages is in English, as I remember. I want to say French, but also I'm very tired this morning, so if I'm wrong, Amina, I'm so sorry. Um, Yeah, I something that I've been thinking about, which is sort of similar. Also, I've not worked on this at all. It's just been like something that I've been like, man, if I had time, I'd love to work on that. That's sort of similar is data ablation studies. So we have sort of a general recommendation of like 7 to 11 examples per intent to begin with, but I think it would really be helpful for a lot of folks if we could do some work on showing, okay, here's how much data you can like chop off with different types of models and like if you're using a larger language model, can you get by with less training data? Or, given the set of intents that have, X degree of overlap or, similarity measures on some measure of similarity, take your pick. Here's how removing an intent would change your outcome. Here's how removing an intent, but reportioning all the data that was within it would change your outcome. I guess that's not technically an ablation study. And also, I don't think that's not the same sort of like recipe enablement modular approach that you were thinking about just now. But God, I'd love to do that. I don't know if I'm gonna have time. I got so much on my plate right now, but yeah.
But that's definitely something the research team is working on, to be
Mm,
honest. Basically, uh, zooming out one step behind and basically looking at how do you quantify the effect of the changes you've made into
mm,
your
mhm,
data,
mhm, mhm,
and how what impact does it have on the downstream success rate of your assistant. That's something that the research team is definitely looking on right now, because I think making a production ready assistant requires you to measure things, and specifically measure things like, hey, I added this new example, does it help or not? Or how many examples do I need to reach a certain measure of, let's say, task success,
absolutely,
right? So all of those are definitely very good but open questions, I would say, and I acknowledge that.
definitely. Um, hello, Swaha. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Amina says it is in French. I remembered right. Haha. Question from Swaha. How do you add a persona to an assistant? So I think by persona here, just to clarify for anybody watching, that would be something like Sarah, who is our not currently available. Carbonbot would be a better example. So Carbonbot is our chatbot that is live, that helps you find carbon offsets for different activities. And by different activities, I mean specifically flights. I think it's specifically flights right now. But if we wanted to add a persona that was like, I don't know, Carbonbot for kids, that was like Carby, that had like a little cartoon. It was like, hey kids, how would we do that? I'm not saying we should do this. I'm just like, that would be an example of a second persona in an existing assistant.
Yeah. That's I think that's an interesting question. I think definitely there are different takes on it. My personal take is that the first ethical responsibility for every assistant is to declare that it is a virtual assistant,
Hmm.
and doing that in but of course you can do that in um, the way you want that persona to behave. So, for example, even if let's say your assistant is talking to kids,
Hmm.
right? You might be able to come up with a way to declare that upfront,
Hmm.
which is still very interactive or playful for a kid.
Hmm.
But going a bit deeper into how do you enable, let's say, conversations which fit to that persona, um, I think one way definitely is there's this feature called conditional response variations,
That's what I was gonna
right?
say.
Yeah. So if let's say, so I think that particular feature, if you want to apply in this context, first of all, for people who don't know about that feature, really what we try to do over there is we give you the ability to use different response templates according to different context of the conversation, right? So for example, let's say some response templates would work well if you're on a WhatsApp channel, but yeah, or rather some would work well if you're on a voice channel, right? But then you can also condition it by what slot has been set, right? So maybe let's say if you consider the slot to be um, defining what kind of an audience the assistant is talking to, that could help you have tailor-made response templates for that particular audience, right? And I think this particular feature would be a great fit for that. Otherwise, I think before the feature, a lot of people did used to actually do this, and they used to write a lot of custom action code, which was quite clunky.
Mm,
But then I would definitely encourage you to use conditional response variations and try it out for this use case.
absolutely. Also, as a caveat, I'm the one who brought up children. If you are specifically targeting children in the US, you're going to run into COPPA, so make sure you talk to your lawyers. Um, yes, and also the channel specific responses, I think, have a slightly different, have a slightly different syntax. This is all covered in our video on responses in the Conversational AI with Rasa course, which has been updated to 3.0 for anybody watching, and that's on our YouTube channel. Yeah, I would also use conditional response variations. And I think the thing that you might, oh, hi, Ravi. I think the thing that you might run into with conditional response variations that I would just be like, FYI, it may not be an issue, is if people tend to have different types of conversational turns with the different personas, right? So if there's one persona where people tend to follow one path more than the other, I would probably have your slots influence the conversation. I wouldn't necessarily start with that to begin with, but if you're noticing a strong pattern, I would probably add that in so that your model can capture it a little bit better. And again, I think it really depends on how different the personas are in terms of whether or not you see that behavior.
Yeah. One thing I would definitely recommend, I think kind of applies to like different, like many use cases, but specifically for this one, it would really help you if you write down what do sample conversations look like for each persona. And then that would really help you what slots do you need and how do you want those slots to influence the conversations and the stories. So yeah, I think my biggest advice always is write sample conversations whenever you're trying to add a new use case or you're starting from scratch.
Absolutely. That's test-driven development in the conversation space for sure.
Yeah.
All right. We have a question from someone whose name is in Cyrillic, so I'm so sorry. I'm not going to be able to read this. They have a dog avatar, so I'm going to call them dog avatar. My apologies. Hi, Daksh. I have recently used a vanilla Rasabot, so base specification, and found it unhandy using Rasa stories because the number of stories is just really big. And then the demo, we can see that the beginning of conversations and stories are common. Also, I have seen systems which use graphs as their dialogue flow. Is there a better way?
Yeah. This is a recurrent question, and this is something that we're looking into for sure. I do want to bring up 2 points over here. One is I'm not sure if you've already looked at what we call as checkpoints.
Okay. Yep.
So checkpoints is a great way to basically write the common part of different stories as one story, and then basically use that checkpoint as a starting point for different other stories, right? It's a great way to condense your stories into a smaller number of stories. From an engineering perspective, we know this slows down your training a bit. The effect of this is that when you train your dialogue manager, the amount of time it takes to process the trackers or process the stories will be higher than usual. But we're right now looking into how we can streamline or simplify that particular algorithm that we use under the hood. The other one that I would also probably look at is, are you using any rules for certain flows, right? So there might be some very simple single turn conversation turns that you might be able to just pull out and place them as a rule instead of having them in each story, right? And that could also bring down the number of stories that you have in your assistant. But other than that,
I'd say also you don't need all your stories to be completely end to end because of the way that we do data augmentation. So as long as like all of the sort of chunks of turns that you're seeing are well represented, it should work fine.
Yep. that's true. I would say that. Yeah.
And then there's Shuhua, sorry if I'm saying that again wrong, said that it was very helpful about the personas, so glad we could help. I think there is another question about using graphs to represent
Mm.
dialogue flows, which is something that I'd say we thought about a lot in Rasa. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, definitely. I think if you view it really, the story representation is also, you can view it as a graph as well. I think that's, I mean, you could say it's a forest of trees, but that's also really a graph, right? But what I really like about the checkpoint way of doing things, that actually brings out the way how a graph is represented, right? So if you think about a checkpoint as a node in a graph, and then all other stories using that checkpoint, you're really building up a huge graph, right? Um, but yeah, other than that, I think, I mean, yeah, I would say how are you looking to leverage any other property of a graph
Mm-hmm.
for dialogue management? That would be my question. I think, because yeah, I'm not so sure how to put that. Do you
Yeah,
have any thoughts, Rachel?
I mean, I think the appeal of the graph base GUI um,
Mm,
is very strong when you're starting a project and you're like, oh, it would be so easy if I could just represent this as, a state diagram or flow chart or something, and then use that to train my assistant. And I hear you. I think it can be helpful for like whiteboarding when you get started, but the scalability of that approach is very limited. If you've ever worked on a very large sort of like uh, if you've ever worked on like a super 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 big flowchart, now imagine maintaining that and figuring out like where it's going wrong and what you need to add and all the potential dependencies, and it's a pain in the butt to be a
yeah.
little bit blunt. Um, yeah, and I don't know if that's specifically what you were talking about with the graph based approaches, but I would only recommend that as a tool to use for very small simple assistants.
Yeah. And also, so I think I definitely misinterpreted the question. I didn't put the GUI aspect of it
Mm.
into the question.
That
So
was my addition.
yeah, so I think the GUI definitely makes sense. We've been talking to a lot of users recently who've expressed the need of a GUI,
Mhm,
primarily because a lot of their conversation
mhm,
designers are not comfortable with, let's say, writing YAML
mhm,
or just working with code, right? And I think, yeah, as Rachel is bringing that up right now, so Rasa Visualize can help you visualize your current set of stories as the graph that you're really just saying over here, right?
mhm,
But definitely, I hear your. I think there's a need for even having a GUI which can help you put these blocks together.
mhm, mhm.
But then, as Rachel said, yeah, it it does get out of hand very quickly
Yeah.
for complex assistants. Um, and yeah, I think what is also important to remember over here is that as you increase the number of stories, or let's say as you increase the number of unique paths in that graph, just managing that whole piece of system gets even more complex, right? And so yeah, I mean, there are certain implications to that, definitely, I would say.
Yeah. And apologies if that was not in your intended question, but I'm sure it was in somebody else's mind, so that's why I hopped that in. Other question. I'm also not sorry. I'm also researching some ways for preferred dialogue flows, and at the same time, not strict. Do you maybe you have any ideas? Okay, so some ways to represent dialogue flows, I think is what I'm getting from that. I'm sorry, I'm pretty tired right now, so if I'm reading badly, my apologies. Um,
um
yeah.
so yeah, I mean, I think that's a good question, to be honest. So one of the things that we have been challenging internally is right now the way how we represent a form inside stories
Mm,
might not be the most optimal, because um, a lot of information inside the forms is completely hidden
mm,
from the story. So for example, if you define three slots in a particular form, what happens if all of those slots successfully get filled is completely hidden from a story, or you're not at least required to put that information in a story, right? And that can have implications, in my opinion. So for example, if you've just written one story where you've not defined what should happen when successfully all slots get filled up, then you don't know what to write as a story when these slots are unsuccessfully filled,
mm,
right? So that's kind of a hidden behavior in the assistant then, right? Or let's say, I think one thing that I've also been thinking about is how do you represent multiple forms? So let's say if a conversation requires multiple forms to be triggered
mhm,
at the same time, how do you enable, or how do you have a better way to represent switching between those forms, or switching between the forms when one of the forms get deactivated, and how do you basically enable going back to the earlier form,
mm, mhm,
right? And I think definitely those kind of things could be improved inside the domain itself. So you could define this behavior where you define the forms itself, right? So you could say, if this slot gets filled, then I want another form to get triggered
mm, mhm.
directly, right? So yeah, I think a lot of this branching logic can be brought into the story format, the domain format itself. Right now I know a lot of users put a lot of code in the custom actions to deal with this, and I've also heard feedback on how that's not that great, because it's hard to maintain.
Yeah,
Definitely.
fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then
I'm
there's
not so sure. I'm not sure if that answer was helpful on the question, but I think I was just putting out my thoughts.
ah, no, I think it's very helpful. And then I mean, a big part of the challenge there is how do you avoid exploding, right? If you have like 8 forms, they can all interrupt each other, and that's the default behavior for forms, which is, that's the research
Yeah,
challenge.
yeah.
All right. Hopefully that helps. And then a question from Amina. Question one: can we have action listen for a specific amount of time? It's a good question.
So does that mean you keep um, you keep accepting new messages from the user until you predict?
Yeah, that's a good question. I am. Oh, there's actually a second part. And then run another action instead if the user exceeded the amount of time.
Mm. You could do that. I mean, you could definitely do that inside a custom action, to be honest. The custom action can keep triggering action listen
Mm-hmm.
for that amount of time. And then once the timer gets up, you could let your dialogue manager, you let your basically other policies take the correct action based on whatever you have accumulated till then.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple of things. I mean, there are a couple of things that you'll have to take care of inside a custom action code. So you'll have to concatenate all user messages most probably into one,
Mm-hmm.
so that, and then do the intent classification of that, and then put that into the tracker. So I can imagine a very messy solution of this. But that makes me question what is the use case, or what's the problem that you're trying to solve. Like, what's the scenario in which you're trying to accomplish this? Really, maybe there's a lightweight, simpler solution that we could come up with.
Yeah. I mean, my hacky solution, depending on what your ideal output would be to change the session restart variable. It's in the domain. It's usually right at the bottom of the domain for how long it takes your session to restart. I just set it to the amount of the time you're willing to wait, and then clear all the slots and restart again. Again, that it depends on what you want, right? That's going to restart the conversation. So but I believe also you can trigger a message on session restart as well and be like, hey,
Yep.
looks like you've wandered off. We're restarting the conversation. Say hi.
Yeah.
All right. Also, Amina wanted to see an example of a graph, and I have popped on over to our forums and pulled one up. And you may say, hey, Rachel, this is really small and hard to read. Yes, it is. And it's a very small graph. So this is for MoodBot, the basic starter assistant you get when you start a assistant, right? When you do Rasa init. And I'm trying to see if this is for 2.0 or 3. I'm trying to see if there's any rules in here, basically. And I don't think there are. I think this is for
Don't have any
1.0.
rules.
Yeah, but this is what it looks like. And as you can imagine, if you had, a lot of complex stories, it would become very, very hard to read. So this is sort of a zoomed out version of what it looks like. Yeah. Hopefully that helps. For those of you who weren't sure what we were talking about when we started talking about graphs. But we were also talking about a little bit of disambiguation here. So part of it is the graph that you look at with your eyes, and part of it is sort of the underlying data structure that we use to determine what happens next. They're both graphs. And then Tashfia, I don't know where that bingle came from. Hopefully none of y'all heard that. There was a big, what's bingling? I thought I had muted everything that could possibly have notifications. I guess not. My apologies if you're hearing a bunch of binong. Which method is more efficient, using checkpoints or just typing the whole conversation flow for each story? And this again is about when you have repetition in stories. I mean, I can tell you what I do. If I didn't need checkpoints, I would just, every chunk that you were seeing multiple times, I would pop out as a separate story. Yeah, I think it is good to have some end-to-end stories, but like I mentioned, they don't all need to be end-to-end because we will do data augmentation to stick the bits together. And I don't want to promise anything, but at some point in the future, you might get a very helpful, deeper discussion of how data augmentation works in Rasa if the stars align.
Yeah, I think my take is it kind of also depends on your appetite for just looking at duplicacy essentially, right? So for example, when I'm building a bot, recently I was working with a particular user who had around 5 different tasks in an assistant, and each task had some bit which was common across different tasks. And they really did not like looking at having to scroll through so many stories, looking at the same piece of snippets. So I would say I think I helped them simplify all of their stories using checkpoints, and they kind of loved that solution. But as I said before, I would warn you of the increased processing time during training that you would incur because of that. That's a known engineering problem, and I do believe there is some amount of motion that's happening inside the organization to fix that right now. So, but yeah, no promises on by when can we do it. But yeah, all I can say is it's definitely a known issue.
And I would say it's a little bit of an individual engineering decision, right? Like, which is more valuable for you, annotation time or training time? So if you have a lot of compute, maybe you have your own hardware and it's just sitting idle most of the time, maybe it makes sense to use checkpoints and just sacrifice the training time for spending less time annotating. Or maybe you have very limited compute resources and it makes more sense to spend more time annotating and less time training.
Yeah. One benefit of checkpoint that I would definitely put out is it helps you get a better coverage of conversation paths, right? So basically, the way how you would write checkpoints, as you can see in this example, is that let's say you have the first checkpoint, which is check asked question. Now, and then every other story is making use of this checkpoint check asked question. So what you're essentially ending up with is that you know that different branches of a conversation are using each and every is using the same pretext of a story, right? So yeah, I think that's a good behavior to achieve for a learning algorithm. It's basically called, like, basically it will help you, it will help the dialogue manager not get into this misconception that certain contexts are more important than and certain other contexts, right? So to achieve this kind of a balancing between context, I think that's also useful when you're using checkpoints, because then it's easier to manage essentially.
Definitely. And I'm just pulling up right now an example of a place where I could have used checkpoints and didn't. So this is from Live Coding last week, where we did a rock paper scissors chatbot, and I have very minimal stories. It's a very simple
Mm.
chatbot. But you can see that after somebody asks to play rock paper scissors again, right? I have this action utter play again. Hey, do you want to play again? And that's picking up from this action at the end of playing rock paper scissors. And because it's so simple, there's not really anything else it can do, right? So if they affirm, we'll go through this path. If they deny, we're going to go through this path. I don't have to say what my intent reply should be to saying goodbye, because I have a rule that handles that. And then if they want to play, again, I don't finish the path here. It's just going to pick up from here. If you are using this approach, you have to be very on top of, sorry, I need to zoom in a little bit so y'all can see better. You have to be very on top of making sure that there are you're pretty parsimonious with your potential story paths. So I think there's a limit to how well this scales. But you might be able to handle some of your complexity this way. So none of these are actually full paths through the assistant from hello to goodbye. They're all little snippets, but through data augmentation and sort of like having limited options, they combine really naturally. So I think checkpoints would have been overplay, overshare. What's the word?
An
Overkill.
overkill.
Overkill. I'll warn y'all, I'm real time. I think checkpoints would have been overkill here, but this is what I'm talking about when I'm saying I just snip it up. So hopefully that's helpful. All right. Oh, we got a question for Daksh on LinkedIn. And if you prefer not to answer a little bit of a personal question, we can maybe take that offline. It's written that you were a freelancer for 4 years. Do the big tech companies outsource some tasks, or is it just small orders from small companies? So again, totally up to you if you feel comfortable answering this.
uh it's something that I do it on the side. It's not something for the Rasa. I did have like a small side gig that I was doing. So yeah, it's basically not as part of Rasa, I would say.
All right. Next question from Amina. It's about a warning. So every time I train converting sparse index slices, blah, 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 value tensor, gradients, dense shape, shape equals 1. I'm trying to look for the specific, what the warning is.
I think I know. Yeah,
Error, reshape 0, shape none, d-type float 32.
I know where this is going. This is basically when we've upgraded TensorFlow from 2.3 to 2.6 now. And this is a known issue in the TensorFlow repo. So we're waiting for them to fix it. And because we're just users of their repo, I think so. It's not something that you should worry about, as that's definitely, I can say. It's so basically because we make use of sparse matrix multiplication when you're using sparse featureizers like count vectors featureizer. There's a particular bug in on TensorFlow side of how this warning should be calculated. So it's not a bug in the operation, but it's just a bug in how the warning should be given out. So yeah, do not worry about it. But yeah, on from our side also, we've communicated this to TensorFlow actually.
Yeah. And we are like I think you might have got the impression we're very noisy to the TensorFlow team. We give lots of feedback.
Yeah, that too. And if let's say, I think one thing that I would add is, I think in the latest 3.0 release, we've also, I'll have to double check, but I think we have suppressed that warning really, because we know that it's a warning that we is kind of just superfluous. So yeah, we've suppressed that. So if you, that's also another added incentive for you to upgrade to 3.0.
And if you're looking for a little bit more support with that process, on Friday at my usual live coding time, which is 4 hours, I think, after this stream, in terms of time of day, I'll be upgrading an assistant from 2 dot something to 3.0. So you can join in with that. All right. Some Cyrillic, which again, I do not read. So I'm assuming the folks are chatting between themselves. And Tashvia says, thank you, that's very helpful. I'm looking forward to the augmentation video. No promises, it might happen. Any suggestions on how to handle cases where the user interrupts one form and triggers another form? I feel like you're going to have feelings about this.
That's a great one actually, because it's a very frequent use case, in the sense that you can imagine your users, while talking to an assistant, switch between multiple tasks, and each of your tasks can have a form that is helping you accomplish that task. So one thing to, first of all, to make sure is, do you have any shared slots between those forms? The reason I say that is because you want to make a conscious decision that, do you want to share that information of a shared slot between the forms or not, in the context of the conversation, right? If you want, then that's completely fine. If you don't want to share, then you want to reset those slots before you start the new form, right? The second thing that you have to, I think, consciously think about is, what should happen when the second form that got triggered gets completed and gets deactivated, right? So should the control go back to the last form? Do you want to ask the user that they want to go back to the last form? That's my recommended approach, to be honest, the latter one, which is, you should always help the user and design the conversation in a way that guides the conversation. So that's something that you can basically write a story for, or even a rule for, right? So you can say, this is the behavior that I want when one of the form gets deactivated. Other than that, yeah, those would be my two main suggestions really, on what you should do when you have multiple forms interleaving each other, really. Do you have any others, Rachel?
I don't think so. Sorry, I was banning a spammer. If you notice me looking off in another direction. No, I think you really covered the main points. All right. We have another question from Amina, who always asks great questions. Can we have multiple choice in Rasa? The buttons only have one option. Can we select multiple choices? Okay, so this would be like checkboxes instead of radio buttons. A new feature, I know I can have that way by putting multiple entities in a payload. So I guess an example would be here, I want to order, do you want to order bread, milk, eggs? Can I hit the button for eggs, the button for bread, and not the button for milk, and have both of those slots set instead of having to say bread and milk and eggs, bread and milk, milk and eggs, bread and eggs, and doing all the combinatorics?
Yeah. It feels like definitely something that you should put inside entities and slots, to be honest. I think I wouldn't want to put it inside an intent, like as the payload of a button, for the simple reason that I think this goes back to a more fundamental question of, how do you structure, or what things you want to accomplish through intents versus what things you want to accomplish through entities and slots, right? My recommendation over there always is that use intents for the high level semantic task that you're doing, which is, so let's say, as Rachel put out as the example, the intent over there is place an order or place a delivery, right? So different ways how people can say that. But then what do you want to order? The items, really, those should be entities and slots,
Mm.
right? Because the bigger problem then would be if you put them in intents or
Mm.
as the payload of a button as intents, then you really have to come up with different ways in which people can
Express
say,
them. Yeah.
express a particular entity, right, or particular item, sorry, right, which will also lead to a lot of duplication across your intents, right? So you'll say, I want to buy an apple. That's one intent. And then in the next intent, you'll say, I want to buy bread, right? And your NLU, your intent classifier, is gonna have a hard time disambiguating between these intents, right? So I would definitely say, if you the known route of putting them into multiple entities and
Mhm.
using that in the payload definitely sounds like the better option to me.
Yeah. Um, I would strongly agree with that. If you if you really do need like a checklist, I mean, I hate to say it, but you're probably going to have to spend some time putting work into building a front end component for that yourself that's custom, and then linking it up with the Rasa SDK. And it's probably going to have to be async a little bit to like wait to collect everything that the user needs and then hit enter. Um, yeah. I think if you really do need a graphical way to represent that, I think that's probably what you're going to have to end up doing. We don't really have a built-in way to do that. Yeah. I'm trying to really think if there's a way that you could like hack Rasa, and I think you're just gonna have to build your own thing. Unfortunately, if you want buttons
I'm
specifically.
I don't know if the Rasa official Rasa web chat widget supports it.
Mm,
But yeah, that's something that you could take a look at. I'm not sure if that it supports it.
yeah, yeah. I can see why you would want that. It would probably be easier to just have people type out their grocery list and then do
Mhm.
entity extraction. I think for everybody involved,
That's
that might
also
be simpler. Oh,
that's also a very great idea. Yeah.
all right. Okay. Swaha has a problem with installing Rasa X on Mac. I have Rasa open source 3.0 installed, Python version 3.8, but obviously it causes some confusion on Mac as it has a different version of Python. Is there a solution to this? I believe Rasa X does not currently support 3.0. So you're
It does
going to
not.
have to downgrade to, I believe, let me get the compatibility matrix.
2.8.14 is the latest one that should be supported then.
Where's the compatibility matrix? Matrix, maybe? All right. Sorry, I'm gonna have to.
Maybe go in Rasa X installation. I think that might.
All right, let's see if I can find it. Installation guide. Sorry, we have a compatibility matrix about reference, maybe? No, that's not it. Uh, uh, there we go. Okay, I found it. And I believe it's not been currently updated for Rasa X 1.0. But yes, you are not going to be able to make that work right now, unfortunately. And it's in an area of active development work, I would say. Oh, yes. Oh, they are persistent today. There we go. Yeah, sorry about that, Swaha. That's my. You're gonna have to downgrade something. And best of luck. And then there's a question from Tapak. Tapak. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. Can you say something about product knowledge, for example? It's only one way with entities. I think this might be in reference to the discussion we were having about multiple slots.
So I'm not sure what I get by. Can you repeat that question for me? Sorry.
Uh, can you say something about product knowledge, for example? Is it only one way with entities? We might actually ask for a little bit more clarification there before we try to answer that, just so we're not
Yeah.
answering the wrong question. So
Yeah.
if you could like provide a little bit more information, I think we're both a little confused. It can
That
be
would be
hard
great.
through the YouTube chat. And then a question from Stallone. Oh, Swaha wants to know when it will be possible to use Rasa 3.0 with Rasa X. I don't think we have a firm deadline at the moment, but know that it is high priority for us. We care. Um, hey, Daksh, what do you do at Rasa? Do you take experiment? Sorry, I'm reading bad. Do you experiment with various machine learning algorithms for Rasa, or do you develop it from scratch? So I think the question here is like, to what degree do you build off other people's work, and to what degree do we start from first principles? And I will, before Daksh says anything, say there's almost never any good reason to start from first principles. Anyway, if you want to
Yeah.
do anything.
No, definitely. I think that's a big rule of thumb that we follow. I think our mission inside research is definitely to do applied research, which means that there is a lot of stuff that is already done and in the academia, and it's really just about porting it over and making it production ready and fitting it to use cases that we see with our customers, with our users, right? So of course, different solutions and different approaches have their own caveats. And really, the research that we do is trying to see, okay, which one is the best fit for a particular use case or a problem that we've seen. Right. So, for example, I think if like when we came up with diet, um, like it's not something that we came up from the first principles, right? So the whole idea behind combining sparse features and dense features into building this modular pipeline actually existed inside Rasa open source. The NLU classifier that existed before Diet had this modularity and compositional behavior inside it beforehand as well. But there were a lot of approaches which showed that, and a lot of internal empirical results that showed that just bag of words featureizers or bag of word features are such a strong baseline when you're trying to learn from small amounts of data and data that's very domain specific. So it was very necessary to come up with an architecture which lets you combine both of these things together. So I think it's definitely a lot of building off from different people's work and then adapting it for the problems that we see for the users and customers. Yeah.
Definitely. Something, something, shoulders of giants. Uh, yeah. And Simone says, thanks. That was helpful. Yeah, glad we could help. Amina says, Docs, you've been working with Raza for 5 years. I think it was 2.5, unless I misheard.
2.5. Yeah. Rasa is not 5 years old yet. So.
Yes. If I heard well, but I think this is a great question. What are the biggest differences between when you started and now? There's
That's
a
a
lot.
great question. um, I mean, one, the team is just enormously bigger, but I think we've definitely evolved into thinking about enterprise teams and how do you build assistants which work in production for large use cases, right? So we've done a lot of ground up thinking on, or we've rather started doing a lot of ground up thinking on what does a complete journey of a bot developer look like when they're building an assistant, and what does it look like when you do this in the context of a large team, right? So you have multiple collaborators which are working together. You have conversation designers, you have data scientists, you have backend developers, and making sure that different workflows are adaptable for different varieties of teams that we keep seeing on a daily basis. that's been a huge focus shift, I think I would say, in the recent months, because I think when we started off 2.5 years back, it was necessary to give everyone the ability to have a flexible framework
Mhm.
using which you can build almost anything, right? So we gave a lot of customizability, right? But now we've also started thinking about what custom behavior is applicable in what kind of a problem or what kind of a use case, right? Because uh, our users want more suggestions, our users more proactive recommendations from us, and that's also where we're shifting towards. I mean, this is something that I'm saying from a research point of view, but
Mhm.
I think from a company point of view, just thinking about workflows almost every day is something that we've been doing very much from the last 6 7 months.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've been here for about 2 years at this point, almost. And yeah, I would say definitely that. Also, I mean, the YouTube channel, which is something that I work on a lot. So from my point of view, that's been a pretty big change. Um, yeah, also I think we do still really have tooling that works for everybody, but I think that you know, individual developers who are working on saying, doing bot development as piecework, where they're working on contracts and they're building bots for folks, are a little bit easier to meet the needs of than like T-Mobile, right? If you haven't watched any of T-Mobile stuff on what they do with Rasa, it's really interesting, and I think if you've never worked at that scale, gives you a really good sense of the challenges, because they're having millions of conversations a day, and their biggest issues are I don't know, pretty different, and that you wouldn't see at the smaller scale. But any improvements we make that like make that millionth conversation go better are also going to help for people who are building much smaller assistants. So yeah, I think it's building a big boat. Is that a saying? I feel like it should be a saying. Setting a large table. Do you know what I mean? We're trying to like handle the things that are very difficult at a very large scale, and that it'll also benefit folks who are working at a smaller scale. Um, Question from Amina. Will the previous versions of Raza be maintained even though 3.0 is out?
Yep. So that's a great question. So the policy that we kind of follow is that, so the last minor version of 2.x series was 2.8.x. So that particular minor version will continue to have only bug fixes in them, but only the critical bug fixes really. But other than that, you can, yeah, we would not be actively maintaining any of the other minor versions. Yeah, other than the ones that for 3.0. But yeah,
I think
hopeful.
that includes security updates now as well.
Yeah.
We'll do security updates. But
Yes.
yeah, I I would recommend, if you have the capability, to update to 3.0. Great question. Riedel says, I've watched all your life coding videos. Oh, all of them? Oh, that's a lot. I don't know. I don't know that I'd recommend watching all of them, but I'm glad you like them enough to watch more than one. Okay. All right. So, Daksh, it is almost the end of the year, right? Which is when people write wrap up pieces. And I'd like you to put on your Nostradamus. Nostradamus was like a fortune teller kind of hat. And tell me, what do you see in the next year, either in sort of NLP or machine learning in general? I mean, obviously, we can't make promises about what's going to happen with Rasa, and we certainly won't promise timelines or specific products. But what do you imagine in the future?
Well, I can probably get to what do I hope for, at least in the next 1 year, in the broader scheme of like machine learning and where the
Hmm.
community is going. Um, I do have like, so for example, I think so there has been a huge um noise around the ImageNet moment for NLP has arrived,
Mm-hmm.
right? When Transformers came in, this was the catchphrase that almost everyone used it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't agree with it. I really think we haven't got as far as we should have had, in the sense that uh, if I think about the amount of things that you can do in a modality like vision and speech, it's far more than what you can do right now with text. And that does not make me say that language is easy. I mean, language is hard. Interpreting natural language is hard. However, I think just this what I would hope for is that we rethink the abstractions at
Mm-hmm.
which that build the building blocks of our current understanding of language, right? And but also I think that's one. The other one is, this is a personal problem that I've been hitting my head against the wall for, which is really coming up with ways in which you can basically embed business logic that enterprises would like in their AI models into their models actually. So for example, let's say you have a deep learning model, right, and which is learned from this huge amounts of data, right, but it can still not do simple amount of tasks which you can maybe express as boolean expressions,
Mm-hmm.
or you could express it as, first order equations, like somehow, right? Just the ability to embed that knowledge into those deep learning models, that's where I would like the community to start moving towards and thinking more and more about. Because um I mean, again, a personal take, I do not like uh, how much just blatant paper writing everyone does, in not in any context of a actual real world problem
Mm-hmm.
or a real world use case. This is not me saying that fundamental research is not important. It is important, but I would like to see much more contribution towards solving enterprise class problems. Because when I talk to a lot of folks from different enterprises, different my previous employers, everyone keeps telling me the amount of problems that you can actually solve with machine learning and the enterprise class problems is really low,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's also because we haven't been thinking about how does a particular solution fit an enterprise class problem,
Mm-hmm.
right? So yeah, which is something that I hope for, I would say.
Yeah,
That's my
definitely. Units of abstraction on language. You sound like a linguist. Uh, yeah, if you ever want to pick a fight with a linguist, ask them to define a word, or ask them if like do phonemes exist, or some of these theoretical constructs around units of language. Yeah, but I would definitely agree, and I think that something that I come up a lot against with researchers. I mean, I would recommend not writing a paper to have written and published a paper, but instead to like genuinely focus on the problem, because otherwise, like, why are you doing it? You're making yourself miserable for no reason, right? But the other thing is a lot of the approaches that folks are working on. I mean, yes, I thought neural networks were universal function approximators. Like, yes, given enough data, but you never have enough data. So I'm really excited for more work on methods that really work with, data scarcity. Particularly, I mean, there's lots of English corpora. There are far fewer corpora for, you know, sorry, I'm just like having like a scrolling list of languages in my head, and I'm just trying to pick one out that's like not like super widely researched, like Malay, right? There's just not that many corpora for Malay. There's just not that much training data available. So can you really say you've solved the problem if you've only solved it for English? No, absolutely not. I think it's same in speech, right? Like, I think we do pretty good on English speech that's in, a clear acoustic environment, and if you're from majority groups, and if you speak a canonical accent, and if you don't have a strong regional accent, right? So, like, if you're in the little box of people for whom the system works well, it works great. And if you're outside of that box, it don't. So,
Yeah.
yeah. And I think these are, I mean, I know that I tend to think about things from the perspective of the user, but yes, from an enterprise perspective, if only 10% of your, prospective customers can use your technology because it just doesn't meet their needs, well, that's a lot of lost business.
Yeah.
Mm.
I mean, the ROI has to go up, really, and that's a constant thing that I keep hearing from my enterprise friends, to be honest. So yeah.
Mm. um, Sorry, there's a couple more questions. We're slightly over time, so I will quickly go through them, and if you would like to stay late and answer them, we can. Randall says, can I get a chance to get an internship at Rasa? I don't know if we have any internships posted right now. Let me check. Sorry, I've got a pen that doesn't have a little hook on it, and it just keeps rolling around on my desk. So if you're hearing that, careers, that's the one.
Be rasa.com/jobs, I think. But yeah.
Open positions. There we go. All right. Oh, we have this position open still. If you speak Mandarin and you'd like to do my job along with me, we're hiring. That position's been open for a while. It's a little hard to fill. Do we have any internship positions available? I don't think right now. I would say that generally, and again, I'm not making any promises, but often the internships are more common in the summer because that's when students are off, just sort of generally. Also, we had an office hours with Liam, our head of talent, a while ago, but I would also definitely recommend going back and watching that if you're job searching because he shared a lot of really helpful information. And then finally, Sloan says, can you recommend a good course, college or master's program to get where you are? And I think that's sort of directed at both of us. I'm going to give you the advice that I give literally everyone. I know that I have a doctorate. I enjoyed getting my doctorate. I don't think it was necessarily a bad choice for me, but I don't, in general, recommend higher education to anyone, particularly in the United States. It is extremely expensive. Even if you're in a paid program, you're giving up a large chunk of your life. Yep. I have a blog post about this, about why not to get a doctorate in linguistics that goes into a lot more detail. But if you had any particular programs you'd recommend, Daksh?
So I can tell what I followed really. I did not. So yeah, funny story. I did a lot of online courses when I was back in college on machine learning. One particular course that I extremely owe everything to is this course called Learning from Data by Abu Mustafa. And it's widely available online. I really loved that course. It did have a great mix of both theoretical understanding of machine learning as well as practical understanding. So I would definitely recommend this one if someone's just trying to get into machine learning, to be honest.
Yeah. So, and then the URL for this, which I know you can't see, is work.caltech.edu/telecourse telecourse.html. So if you are interested in checking it out, this is the one, right?
Yep.
Yeah, there's a lot of online material available. Also, if you're specifically interested in getting into a career in data, Data Science Renee on Twitter is fantastic. She shares a lot of resources and, helps provide community for folks who are trying to get into the field. So I'd recommend her. Great. And I think that is all we've got time for today. So thanks so much for joining today, Daksh. Thank you, everybody, for your fabulous questions. I think we had a really good session today. And yeah, I'll be back on Friday for that 2.0 I don't remember what specific subversion I'm going to be migrating from. So 2.0 to 3.0 migration video, we'll just be doing it live together. And I'm going to start in an environment that has 2.0 on it. So we'll also show the upgrading of the Anaconda environment as well. And then next week, we will also have an office hours, and there may or may not be a stream on Friday, but next Wednesday is definitely going to be the last office hours of 2021. So if you've got any questions left over, that's your chance. So thanks so much for joining today, Josh. Thanks for everybody in the chat, and we will talk to you later. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.